For the longest time, I was genuinely convinced that JRPGs just weren't for me. I'd look at the screenshots in magazines, the static menus, the rows of numbers, and those weird, blocky Lego men from Final Fantasy VII, and I'd just roll my eyes. It felt like a club I wasn't invited to, a hobby that required a level of patience I just didn't think I had. I was the kid looking for the immediate feedback, a quick thrill of a platformer, or an arcade port where things exploded when I pressed the button. I didn't want to spend 10 minutes in a menu deciding which pair of trousers gave me +2 fire resistance. But then, back at Index Entry 46, I finally sat down with Cloud and Sephiroth, and the doors didn't just open, they were blown off the hinges. That 50-hour journey through Midgar was an absolute eye-opener. It made me realise that I'd been dismissing an entire genre based on a thumbnail, when I should have been looking at the soul of the thing. It changed how I view the PlayStation library entirely. But now, I'm standing at the base of a different mountain, and honestly, I'm a little nervous. There's a specific kind of anxiety that comes with following up a masterpiece. When you've just experienced a mega epic that redefines your entire taste in games, the inevitable question is, can lightning strike twice, or was Final Fantasy VII just a one-off fluke? I've spent the last few weeks wondering if I'm actually an RPG guy now, or if I just happen to like that one specific story. Following up the game that changed everything is a massive ask, and Final Fantasy VIII arrived in September 1999, carrying the weight of the entire world on its shoulders. It had to prove that the Final Fantasy name wasn't just a lucky break, but a standard you could actually rely on. The first thing that hit you, and I really mean hit you, is that the Lego men are finally gone. The visual wall that kept me away from the series for years has been replaced by something that, in 1999, looked like it came from the future. The characters look like people, the proportions are normal, and the cinematic ambition has been cranked up so high that the PlayStation feels like it's vibrating with the effort. But as a newly minted RPG fan, I'm realising that beauty in this genre is usually a trap. Underneath that gorgeous surface is a game that is famously, almost aggressively weird. It's a story about a military academy, a moody mercenary with a gunblade, and a magic system that throws everything I've just learned in Final Fantasy VII out the window. I'm stepping into this not as a veteran, but as a convert who's still learning the language. I'm the guy who's probably going to make a dozen stupid mistakes in the menus before I even leave the first room. So let's see if Squall, Leonhardt can capture the same magic that Cloud Strife did, or if I've finally met the game that proves I'm still a guy who's a bit out of his depth. Let's get into it. Welcome to the PSX Index, I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index Entry 73. It dropped on September 9th, 1999, and if you had a PlayStation that week, you basically vanished from society. Within 48 hours, Final Fantasy VIII became the fastest selling game in the US. It wasn't just a sequel. It was a massive cultural event. Everyone wanted to see how Squaresoft was going to follow up Final Fantasy VII, which is basically the equivalent of trying to follow up the moon landing. The answer they gave us was a 4-disc monster that took every rule I just spent 50 hours learning and set them on fire. Coming into this right after my first run of the last game, the change is almost overwhelming. We've gone from 3 discs to 4, and you can tell where all that extra storage went. Everything feels expensive. This was the game where the series decided to grow up. The characters are realistic, there's a full pop song for a theme, and they completely ditched the traditional magic point system. It was a massive gamble. Instead of playing it safe and giving us Cloud Strife 2.0, they went in a direction that was cleaner, more futuristic, and mechanically way more complicated. It feels like the developers were trying to see exactly how much they could torture the PlayStation's hardware before it gave up the ghost. Documenting this one is a different kind of challenge for me. We're trading the dirty, industrial slums of Midgar for the bright, high-tech halls of the Balam Garden. This is an elite military school for mercenaries called SeeD, and honestly, the whole mercenary student thing is a vibe I wasn't expecting. The game is notoriously polarising. You've got people who swear it's the best in the series, and people who think the Junction System is a war crime. As the new guy who's still figuring out what a limit break is, I'm coming at this with zero nostalgia. I don't care what the magazine said in '99, I just want to know if it's fun. So here we are, Index Entry 73, a 4-disc odyssey about time travelling sorcerers, teenage angst, and a card game that I am almost certainly going to spend too much time playing. I've got my controller, a fresh save, and a very limited understanding of how any of this works. Let's see if I'm actually an RPG fan now, or if I'm about to get my head kicked in by the first boss because I forgot to equip my fire demon. If the last game proved the PlayStation could tell a serious story, this one proved it could look like a summer blockbuster while doing it. After getting used to the blocky Popeye arm models in Final Fantasy VII, the first few minutes of this game are a total system shock. You don't start with a simple text box or a bit of dialogue. You're hit with a massive booming orchestral piece while two teenagers have a brutal sword fight on a cliffside with rose petals and feathers flying everywhere. It's incredibly dramatic, and it tells you right away that the Lego look is dead and buried. I remember sitting there with my mouth open, wondering how they got a CD to do that. This was the peak of the FMV era. Squaresoft wasn't just using those videos as a reward for finishing a level anymore. They were using them to set a mood that the rest of the industry couldn't touch. The technical jump is just ridiculous. Seeing characters with actual faces that show emotion really changes how you connect with the story. You aren't just looking at a puppet anymore, you're looking at Squall, and you can actually see the scars Sifa just gave him in real time. It removes that layer of video game guesswork and replaces it with something that feels like a high-end animation. The coolest thing it does though is how it blends these movies with actual gameplay. This blew my mind. You'll be watching a cinematic of a massive military landing on a beach, with boots hitting the shores and soldiers scrambling, and suddenly, without a load screen or a jarring cut, the camera zooms in and you're in control of your character running through the smoke. It's seamless. For a guy like me who struggles with the retro look of the previous game, this was the moment the wall finally crumbled. The vision was right there, front and centre. It's the moment where the PlayStation stopped feeling like a 32-bit machine trying its best and started feeling like a portal into a big budget film. You can feel the confidence in every transition. They knew they had the best looking game on the market, and they weren't shy about it. It's a level of polish that makes you stop and appreciate just how far we've come in the index. We went from simple sprites and flat backgrounds to this cinematic powerhouse in just a few short years. It's impressive, even today, to see how much they squeezed out of that grey box. I spent most of the first disc just waiting for the next cutscene, not because I was bored of the game, but because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Moving from the dirty, crowded slums of Midgar into the high-tech, sun-drenched halls of Balam Garden is a massive shift. If the last game felt like a desperate fight for survival, this one starts out feeling like a futuristic university drama. Balam Garden isn't just a base. It's an elite academy for training soldiers, mercenaries known as SeeD. It's a huge circular building with a library, a cafeteria, a parking lot, and even a training centre infested with T-Rexes for practice, which honestly seems like a massive health and safety violation, but I guess that's just how they do things in the future. As someone who missed out on RPGs back in the day, the vibe here is actually pretty great. It has that relatable, awkward tension of being a student, but with the stakes cranked up. You're worrying about written exams, trying to find your way to class on time through these winding hallways, and dealing with student council drama, all while being trained to take down monsters for a paycheck. It's mercenary life seen through a school hallway. You aren't just a rebel, you're a student with a dorm room, a desk and a lunch schedule. The music in the garden is one of the most relaxing things I've heard so far. It's just a steady, gentle beat that makes you want to hang out and watch other students go by. It's in these quiet moments, like checking the school's internal website to read about a hot dog shortage in the cafeteria or hearing some gossip about the teachers, that the game finds its personality. It doesn't start with a world-ending threat. It starts with you being a 17-year-old kid with a deadline. It makes the world feel like people actually live there, even if those people are all wearing weirdly fashionable belts and zippers. This slow start is actually a smart move. It forces you to live in Squall's shoes before the chaos kicks off. You learn the layout, meet the instructors, and start to understand how the SeeD organisation works. By the time the story finally drags you out of the classroom and onto the battlefield, you'll actually feel like you have something to lose. You aren't just saving a random city, you're protecting your home and the place where you probably left your favourite pen. It's a personal scale that makes the massive war that follows feel much more significant. I spent more time than I'd like to admit just wandering around the courtyard, soaking in the atmosphere and forgetting that I was supposed to be a hardened soldier. It's the first time an RPG felt less like a quest and more like a life I was actually living. If you want to understand the aesthetic of 1999, you just have to look at the gunblade. It makes absolutely no sense from a physics standpoint. It's a massive ornate sword with a revolver handle and a trigger where the hilt should be. You don't fire bullets out of it like a rifle. Instead, pulling the trigger causes a blank to fire, making the blade vibrate so it cuts deeper. It is peak late 90s logic, over-designed, unnecessary and undeniably cool. It's the kind of thing you'd see on a poster and just want to play as the guy holding it. For a guy like me who wanted some edge in his games, the Gunblade was the hook. It moved the series away from traditional knights and wizards and onto something more modern and aggressive. Carrying this thing around school immediately makes Squall look like someone who isn't interested in a typical conversation. And the game actually rewards you for leaning into that fantasy. During combat, you have to time your own trigger pulls with R1 exactly when the sword connects. It's a small, rhythmic interaction, but it bridges the gap between the turn-based wait your turn menus and the kinetic feel of an action game. It makes the combat feel human because you're actively involved in every swing. It also works as a symbol for the rivalry between Squall and Cypher. They open the game by scarring each other for the life with these things, and that weight follows you throughout the 4 discs. The Gunblade isn't just a tool, it's a statement of identity. In the last game, Cloud's Buster Sword felt like a heavy piece of industrial metal. In this one, the Gunblade feels like a precision instrument. It's sleek, it's loud, and it fits the professional mercenary vibe perfectly. As a first timer, mastering the trigger pull became a bit of an obsession. It's one of the few RPG mechanics that relies on your actual reflexes rather than just your stats. Every time you see that flash on the screen and hear the bang of the cylinder, you get a tiny hit of dopamine. It's silly, yeah, but it's the kind of silly that you buy into the moment you see it in motion. It defines the era, and it's a huge part of why the game feels so distinct from everything that came before it. It's not just a sword, it's a mood. I'll admit, I spent a good 20 minutes in the training centre just trying to get the timing perfect on a bunch of low-level monsters, feeling like a total badass until a T-Rex showed up and reminded me that I was still a level 5 student. This is where the non-RPG guy in me started to sweat. In Final Fantasy VII, you had materia, simple little marbles you put in your gear. It was intuitive, but the game throws that away for the Junction System, which feels a bit like doing a complex tax return. It's the mechanic that makes or breaks the game for most people, and for a beginner, it feels like hitting a brick wall made of menus and spreadsheets. You don't buy magic here, you take it. You spend your turns in battle using the draw command to literally suck spells out of enemies like a supernatural vampire. You can hold 100 of each spell, but here's the weird part, you don't actually want to cast them. Magic is for hoarding. You junction those 100 fire spells in your strength stat to make your sword hit harder. If you actually cast the spell, your stats go down because you have less of that magic in your inventory. It's a system that actively punishes you for playing like a traditional wizard. It turns every battle into a resource management mission where you're constantly weighing the benefit of a spell against the loss of your stat. Then there are the Guardian Forces or the GFs. These are your summons, like Ifrit or Shiva, and they are the backbone of your existence. Without a GF equipped, you can't even use the item command or see your own magic menu. You are effectively a powerless teenager until you bond with a giant fire demon. The dry humour of it is that these things live in the part of the brain where memories are stored, so the more you use them, the more you forget your own childhood. It's a high price to pay to have a magic button, and it adds a layer of dread to the gameplay that I wasn't expecting. For a newcomer, it's a lot to wrap your head around. I spent the first few hours hovering over the menus, terrified that I was drawing the wrong things or breaking my stats. It's a backwards system that defies everything you know about RPGs, but once it clicks, it gives you a level of power that the last game never allowed. You can theoretically become a god before you even leave the first disc, if you're patient enough to play cards and draw spells. It's polarising and bizarre, but once I got into it, I realised the complexity is part of the charm. It's a game that demands you to learn its weird language, and once you do, you feel like you cracked a secret code, even if the code means I spent 4 hours staring at a stat screen instead of exploring the world. If Cloud Strife was the poster boy for the stoic cool, then Squall Leonhardt is the patron saint of being socially awkward. As the main character, Squall is a fascinating study in late 90s moodiness. He is the guy who stands in the corner of the party, arms crossed, staring at the floor and answering every heartfelt question with a single dismissive word, whatever. Coming from a non-RPG background, I expected the hero of a 50-hour epic to be a bit more heroic. But Squall starts the game as a deeply reluctant leader who clearly wants to be anywhere else. He's obsessed with self-reliance, terrified of letting people get close to him, and burdened by a massive chip on his shoulder. It's that feeling of teenage isolation. He isn't some chosen one destined to save the world. He's a kid who just wants to pass his exams and be left alone in his dorm room. What makes him work, however, is the internal monologue system. Because we can see Squall's private thoughts on screen, though thoughts that are often more vulnerable and panicked than the cold exterior he shows his friends, he becomes surprisingly relatable. You see the gap between who he is and the merc persona he's trying to maintain. He's not just a moody teen for the sake of aesthetic, he's a defense mechanism in human form. You'll be in a scene where a character is pouring their heart out, and Squall's internal thought bubble will just say, "I can't deal with this," or "Why is everyone relying on me?" It adds a level of dry humour that you usually don't find in these grand adventures. His relationship with the rest of the cast, particularly the high-energy Renoa Hartley, is where the real meat of the story lies. She is the total opposite of everything he stands for. Loud, impulsive and emotional. Watching her chip away at his whatever armour is the emotional core of the game. It's a romance that feels more like a teenage drama than a fantasy war, and for a guy who's still learning to love the game, that personal stake makes the world's ends and threats feel much more grounded. You aren't just fighting for the planet, you're fighting so this guy can finally learn how to talk to people. By the later discs, you realise Squall isn't just an edgelord, he's a kid who's been forced into a soldier's life and doesn't know how to cope. It's a much more psychological approach than I saw in the last game. Instead of a secret history or a hidden past, Squall's biggest obstacle is just himself. As a first timer, I found that refreshingly honest. It's easy to root for a hero who's saving the world, but it's even easier to root for a hero who's just trying to figure out how to be a person. It makes the journey feel intimate, turning a massive scope of the game into a very focused story about overcoming the fear of being hurt. I'll admit, I spent half the game wanting to shake him, but by the end, I just wanted to buy the guy a drink. There is a very real danger in Final Fantasy VIII that has nothing to do with the sorceresses or the world-ending catastrophes. It's a 3x3 grid, a catchy bass-driven theme tune, and a deck of cards. Welcome to Triple Triad, the most addictive minigame ever to grace the PlayStation. In Final Fantasy VII, we had the Gold Saucer, a collection of weird distractions like snowboarding, but Triple Triad isn't a distraction, it's a way of life. Almost every NPC in the world, from the headmaster of your school to a random guy sitting on a bench in a quiet town, is secretly a card shark. You walk up to them, press square, and suddenly you aren't a mercenary anymore, you're a professional gambler. The game itself is deceptively simple. Each card has 4 numbers. You place a card on the grid, and if your number is higher than the opponent's adjacent card, you flip it to your colour. Whoever has the most cards of their colour at the end wins. But it gets complicated fast with weird regional rules like same, plus, or the absolute soul crunching random. You'll find yourself travelling across continents not to save people, but to manipulate the trade rules so you can win a rare card from someone's mother. I spent hours in the school hallway just challenging a running kid to a duel because I knew he had a card I wanted. It's a game within a game that has its own logic and its own obsessed community. The dry humour of it all is that the silly card game is actually the most efficient way to break the game's balance. Remember the Junction System? Well, if you use the card mod ability, you can turn those cards into rare items, which you then refine into high-level magic. While Squall's friends are worrying about the upcoming war, I'm in a hallway playing cards with a kid so I can turn a mini-mod card into high-end healing items. It turns the entire world into a resource gathering mission disguised as a hobby. It's a genius bit of design that rewards you for exploring and talking to NPCs, even if all you're doing is taking their lunch money in card form. As a first timer, Triple Triad was the thing that finally made the world of the game feel real. It's a shared culture, it's something everyone in the universe does, regardless of whether they're a soldier or a civilian. It gives the world a texture that a lot of other RPGs lack. You'll say you're only going to play one game before heading on to the next mission, and 3 hours later, you've forgotten where you were supposed to go, but you have a full set of GF cards and a very smug sense of accomplishment. It's the ultimate just one more round trap, and it's a massive part of why people still talk about this game with such a mix of love and frustration. I may have failed a few SeeD exams, but I've got a deck that would make the final boss weep. Walking out of the gates of Balam Garden for the first time reveals a world that feels fundamentally different from the one Cloud inhabited. In the last game, the world map was beautiful, but it felt like a symbolised painting, a collection of toy-like towns. In Final Fantasy VIII, the map feels like an actual planet. Thanks to the realistic character models, the cities don't just feel like RPG hubs, they feel like actual urban centres. When you arrive in a place like Deling City, the camera angles show off the sheer height of the buildings and the depth of the streets. You're walking through train stations, catching buses, and checking into hotels that actually have lobbies and elevators. It has the feel of being a traveller in a foreign country. It's grounded in a way that high fantasy usually isn't. You aren't just visiting the Fire Town, you're visiting nations with their own laws and public transport. I was genuinely impressed by the effort to make these places feel functional. You have to buy a ticket for the train, and you can actually sit in the carriage and watch the scenery go by. It's a slow detail that most games would skip, but here, it adds to the immersion. You aren't just teleporting around, you are existing in a space that has a scale you can feel. It made me realise that I wasn't just playing a game, I was exploring a geography. The pre-rendered backgrounds are so detailed that you'll often find yourself just standing still, soaking in the architecture of a futuristic opera house or a quiet coastal town. The trade-off is that the world can feel a bit lonelier because the scale is so big, but that just adds to the atmosphere. You aren't just a group of adventurers, you're a squad of professionals moving across a map. For a guy who's still new to this, that groundedness is what kept me hooked. It's much easier to care about the global conflict when the world looks like a place people actually lived in. It makes the eventual shift into the weirder, more magical elements of the story land with more impact because you've spent so much time on recognisable ground. By the time you're flying a mobile fortress across the ocean, you have a real sense of just how much ground you're covering. It's a massive technical achievement that makes the 4-disc journey feel like a global odyssey. It's the moment the PlayStation hardware finally matched the ambition of the people making the games. And for a guy who spent years playing 2D platformers, seeing this level of world building was a total wow moment. If the last game was about the fate of the planet, this one is at its heart a love story. It's a bold move for a game that starts with a military mission, but the core of the journey isn't the war, it's the relationship between Squall and Rinoa. For a guy who isn't a traditional RPG player, this shift in focus made the game much easier to get through. I might not fully grasp the magic lore yet, but I definitely understand the awkward tension of a first dance or a shared moment in the rain. It's relatable in a way that saving the live stream just isn't. The vibe here is all about vulnerability. For half the game, Squall is an emotional fortress, pushing people away so he doesn't have to deal with the pain of loss. Rinoa is the wrecking ball. She's messy, she's optimistic, and she forces him to actually join the world. The game's logo even gives it away. It's not a meteor or a weapon, it's two people embracing. It's the ultimate stake that makes the world saving stuff feel like a backdrop. You aren't just grinding for levels to kill a god, you're doing it because you want to see if these two kids can actually make it work. The focus on romance was a huge gamble. In 1999, romance in games was usually just a side quest or a simple reward at the end. Here, it is the main engine of the plot. There's a scene on the 3rd disc set in space that is one of the most effective emotional moments I've experienced in the index so far. It's where the graphics and the music finally come together to hit you with a real punch. You realise you aren't just fighting to stop a villain, you're fighting because Squall finally found someone he's afraid to lose. I found this far more moving than I expected. It turned the 50-hour journey into something deeply personal. It's not just about a hero saving the world, it's about a lonely kid finally learning how to let someone in. It's that shift from mercenary professional to vulnerable teenager that gives the game its weight. It proves you don't need a world-ending meteor to create stakes. Sometimes, just the fear of being alone is enough to drive a masterpiece. I went in for the sword guns, but I stayed for the characters. So the big question, does Final Fantasy VIII capture the same lightning in a bottle feeling that Final Fantasy VII did? As someone who spent years avoiding these games because I didn't think I had the RPG brain for them, I went into this expecting a sophomore slump. I thought the complexity of the Junction System or Squall's attitude would be the wall that finally stopped me. I thought maybe I'd just gotten lucky with Cloud's story, but the reality is much more rewarding. If the last game was an eye-opener, this is the one that proves the genre is actually for me. It confirmed that the magic of the series isn't just about one specific world, it's about the audacity of the storytelling. Final Fantasy VIII is weirder and riskier than its predecessor. It trades the dirty grit of Midgar for a high-fashion romance that looks like it belongs on a movie screen. It trades simple mechanics for a system that practically invites you to break it if you're willing to put in the work. It doesn't just repeat the formula, it tries to reinvent it while you're still playing. The feeling I'm left with is that this series, at its peak, refused to play it safe. They could have easily made Final Fantasy VII Part 2 and call it a day. Instead, they gave us a game that feels like a fever dream directed by a high-budget studio. It has this incredible confidence. The music, the visuals, and even the bizarre card game obsession all feel like they belong to a single coherent vision. Does it have the same massive cultural weight as Cloud's journey? Maybe not to everyone, but for me, as a newcomer, it feels like the more impressive achievement because it's unashamedly its own thing. I've realised through playing this that I wasn't just missing out on a genre, I was missing out on a way of experiencing stories that actually has something to say about growing up and facing your fears. I'm no longer just trying out JRPGs for the sake of the index. I'm in. I'm officially a fan. Final Fantasy VIII took my expectations, scrambled them with a card grid and a sword gun, and handed them back as a masterpiece. It might be polarising, and it might be a headache to learn, but once it gets its hooks into you, there's absolutely nothing like it on the PlayStation. Finishing Final Fantasy VIII feels like waking up from a long, incredible, vivid dream. It was a journey that started with a fight and ended with me realising I'm officially an RPG guy now. It's a messy, beautiful game that pushed the PlayStation to its absolute limit, and I'm glad I finally stopped looking at the numbers on the screen and started looking at the heart of the story. It's the kind of game that stays with you long after the credits roll, making you rethink what a video game story can actually be. 73 games down, 1,205 games to go. Next time on the PSX Index, we are leaving the magic, the mercenary schools and the teenage drama behind for something entirely different. We've covered platformers, horror, fighting games and even massive RPGs, but we haven't touched the track once. That's about to change in a very big way. Get ready for Index Entry 74, Gran Turismo. We're looking at the first true racing game in the Index, and it's a big one. The real driving simulator that changed the genre forever. We're trading magic spells for engine specs and sword guns for gear shifts. It's time to see if I can handle the transition from the fantasy of SeeD to the cold, hard physics of the Sunday Cup. I've spent the last 100 hours casting spells. Let's see if I actually know how to take a corner at 120 miles per hour. I'll see you at the starting line.